So hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Miller. Thank you for coming to VCEDU's event on budgeting for your first documentary feature. Video Consortium is a global network of journalists and documentary filmmakers and works to provide resources and community to its members. I'd like to introduce you to director Rebecca Davis and line producer Katie Schwartz. Rebecca and Katie recently premiered the documentary film Join or Die at South by Southwest, and the film is currently enjoying a successful festival run. So definitely be sure to keep an eye out for screenings near you. Rebecca is a documentary director and producer, and she's worked on many projects for Vox, NBC News, HBO, Vice, and more that I could go on forever. And Katie Schwartz is an EIC and line producer, currently with Maxine Productions, where she oversees development and production. Katie's worked again on a variety of projects for ESPN, HBO, CNN, MTV. And again, more I could go on and on. For now, I will kick it off to Rebecca and Katie, and they'll take it from here.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks everyone who's joining us. I'm loving reading about everyone's projects. It's so fun to see new faces and also familiar faces in the audience today. So let me go ahead. I'm going to share screen real quick. And I'm Rebecca. I was the editor on Join or Die, and I'm joined today by our line producer, Katie Schwartz, who was one of the most crucial hires on our project. That going into it, I didn't know just how crucial they would be, which is one reason when Sky at the Video Consortium approached me and said, do you want to do a workshop, something having to do with documentaries? I felt like this subject of budgeting was a good one because it was the thing I knew the least about going into the project. But it ended up being like one of the things I really needed to understand to make the project happen, just as much as all the kind of creative and story elements. Okay, so we will talk about budgeting for your first feature documentary. Join or Die was my first feature documentary. I started it in 2018 and we premiered it at South by Southwest in March. So it was a five-year journey. This is our Join or Die poster. It is a film about the link between civic life in America and the strength of our democracy, and the work of this social scientist you see in the lower left-hand corner, Robert Putnam, who spent his career as an academic at Harvard studying these connections between things that we might not think have a connection to democracy, like our bowling leagues and our gardening clubs and our book clubs, and things like the Video Consortium, which I was always happy to talk about on stage when people tried to get me with the zinger, are you a member of any associations? And I was able to say, yes, I am. In the talk today, we're going to be talking about budgeting as a fundraising tool, how to make your plan when you've got a great idea and you want to see how to move ahead and how much it'll cost to move ahead and get to the finish line. Some surprising line items that I hadn't thought about when I was kind of first trying to plan out what this project would look like. And then how to break down a really big project into smaller chunks so you can make it more manageable. Because I think this journey can be really intimidating at the beginning when you think ambitiously about these projects you want to do and how much money and time it might make to do them. So how do you break that down into component parts to take things kind of one slice at a time? First off, and again, this was a frame of mind change that I had to make coming from being kind of more of an independent, like shooter editor type. The idea that the budget was going to be an integral part of our fundraising abilities. So I thought, I've got this great idea. I've started working on a sizzle. I'll just figure it out as I go. But the budget really ended up being the thing that I was able to sell our funders on, not just the idea, but by being able to show them with the budget, I know how to get to the finish line. And so for those of you that are on here now that are thinking about projects you want to do, along with that idea, it is really important to really be thinking about the financing of that project right from the start, because funders, they want to see you have a roadmap from where you're at now to where you're going to finish it, because they want to know that their investment is going to be something that pays off and that you know how to get to the finish line. And it also ended up informing my creative decisions, because then when I first sat down with Katie, which she'll talk about a little bit later in the session, she was able to ask me a ton of questions that related to our finances that forced me to think about creative decisions I was making. Where were shoots going to happen? How were we getting to those shoots? Were those shoots going to be in people's homes, or did we need to rent spaces for them? Who was our creative team and where did they live? And were we going to have to fly them or drive them from different places to get to where they needed to go, to get the material we needed to make our film? Budget and the creative ended up being something that was really working together hand in hand in that planning stage. For those of you who've started potentially trying to apply for funding for documentary ideas, or maybe have had successful docs in the past, this is kind of the documentary core application. This is kind of the centralized application that as you're looking for funding, you fill out, and it was standardized, I think maybe within the last decade, I'm not exactly sure, but it's a great thing, similar to college applications having more standardization. It means that we just fill out one application, and as we send it to the 100 potential foundations that we were looking for money for, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And right on this documentary core application, for anyone that this is new to, they want a budget. So in addition to writing out all the stuff about your idea, they're really going to want to see what is the exact amount of money that you need to get from where you're at now to having a finished film if we're going to invest in it. And so this is what we filled out, and we sent along with our proposal to we had two major funders for our film, two foundations. And so it was really right at the start that we got the money from them that we reached out to Katie, who's going to talk to us next, to help us make that budget, because I didn't know how much it cost to make what I wanted to make. I really needed a line producer's support to come on and put creative ideas into dollar amounts for us.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks, Lindsay, for having me. It's nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining our talk. Rebecca, I don't think you knew this, but this Join or Die was my first completely independent film or project. I'd never done anything without like a network or a studio backing. Okay, so we'll get started. So when I first met Rebecca, and we started talking about our budget, the most important thing to think about when you're coming up with your budget and your schedule is that it's just a conversation, and it's a conversation that you're just going to keep having as the project evolves, and that things can and absolutely will change, but like use the schedule and the budget as your like backbone and your framework. And then from there, you can make your project, like however long it takes, like you just know where you're going and kind of like how you're going to get there. I think I told Rebecca the first time we met that we should go in high and ask for the actual amount of money we needed to make this project, because initially Rebecca had said she would do more than just produce and direct. As we went on, like she did take on so much of every role, but like you really need to make sure that you have enough money for the crew you need. Even if they have to go part-time, like you can always go down in your budget, but it's almost impossible to ask for more money. If you present them with a really low number and show them that you can make that work, it's going to be hard to ask for what you actually need. When you first start, I kind of just got a feel for what Rebecca was thinking, and she explained the project to me, and I just start with a list of questions, right? Who's on your core team? Have you started conversations with them? Do you know their rate? Are you trying to hit like a festival deadline, or are you trying to hit a different deadline? Like, do you have someone like a DP or someone you want to work with that's only available for a certain amount of time? So I feel like once you start to know how long this could go, then you can start to make your plan. So like, maybe it's going to go for a year because you're going to try to hit like Sundance's deadline, or the story you're following, like goes up to a certain point, say like an event or an election or something, and then you'll have like a little bit of time afterwards, maybe you want to film, and then you'll start post. So it's super important because you need a framework for how long people are going to work, because I think we'll talk about this more too in taking care of your crew and your teammates. But I feel like it's super important when you start hiring people to manage some expectations. Like, we're going to have you on full time for this amount of time, but then you're going to go part-time. Maybe you'll come back full-time to finish. But so it's like helpful because since we're all freelancers, it's helpful for people to be able to plan their downtime and their lives. So I think that's super important too, when you're talking about the schedule. And then, just like basics, like, is this a doc? How long is the doc going to be? Or is it a series? I should say not a doc, a film, and then we start talking about the story. Who are we filming? Where are we doing it? Where are you going to be? Are you going to travel to each shoot? Are you talking to a specific DP? Does that DP have a crew they like to work with? Or are we hiring piecemeal? Something important to remember is when you're hiring crew, some people can provide their own gear. And then you have to remember that you have to pay them their kit fees or their gear rental fees, which, as you can see, so something I asked Rebecca very early is, how many shoot days do you want? And then do you want to break it in interview, which is just like a static location that we pick, and how many days are verite, where we're out in the field, maybe with a smaller crew. So then you can start to break it down, right? And you can see that we broke it down by interview and verite. There's some prep if we're doing gear rentals, but then also, down here for camera rentals, you can see maybe the DP's camera package will be more robust for interviews, and maybe it'll be a little smaller for verite because they're just carrying everything around. So that's where you kind of start, and then you build out the crew. Then you're like, okay, I want a gaffer definitely for interview days, but for verite, we don't really need one. Or maybe we just need someone occasionally. So as you start to ask these questions, you can start to build your budget and the framework and how it's going to go, with the understanding that it will absolutely change. Inevitably, you will probably need more shoot days than you think. And that's okay. It's super important, especially for the line producer and the director, when they talk, you wanna, as you keep talking about this, start to forecast. As Rebecca and I talked and we started to make our plan, we put the top of who she wanted for a DP, so we put in I put in the rates that I find that are industry standard, which is also super important to pay people their rates so that we can keep industry standard and allow people to make a livable wage, especially as freelancers with, the state of the market and what can happen. So it's important, as you get going, you just keep talking about this so you can forecast. We filmed 2 days, Rebecca, and then the pandemic shut us down, literally. So after we did our first 2 shoot days, we kind of talked about, okay, so how did that go? What did we need? How did we feel about the camera? How did we feel about the length of the day? I prefer to keep everyone on a 10 with a 12+ hour turnaround. Whatever you pick for your day, keep it consistent, right? You shouldn't change it on people, so that if everyone expects a 10, but you start going into 12s, they should get OT. Whatever we put in these lines. So for field people, we put in by day, right? Because usually you want people to be on a day, unless you're shooting in blocks of time. You're never really going to put anyone on a weekly, but producers and maybe line producers, APs, editors, people like that, maybe you put them on a weekly, because once you make your schedule, you'll know how long everyone's supposed to be on. As you go, you'll start to see, which is important for the line producer, you should have some sort of tracker where you can track your actual spending, right? So you can see hey, we're not spending any hair and makeup money, so I'm going to take the money, I'm going to zero out that line, and I'm going to use it for more DP days.
We needed masks at that point and COVID tests, which was a cost we had no idea at the beginning. We ended up not needing a ton of hair and makeup. So then, we had that little bit of safety money. Katie was hiding acorns everywhere, in our budget for the unknown pandemic. So that, then when we had to, spend a lot more money that we didn't anticipate, we had it.
Yeah. We also had to adjust our crew. We no longer flew people. Once we felt comfortable filming in the pandemic, everyone drove. So then that was we didn't really have that much money to rent cars. We were planning on using taxis or whatever. And so then all of a sudden we had car rental fees that were higher. Our locations became more expensive because we got bigger locations so that people weren't in the same room. We made sure that hotels were a little bit like you always want to give crew a nice hotel, but we made sure like we had nicer hotels because we wanted to make sure there are COVID protocols. It's important to remember it's okay if you forget a line item. Like you don't have to like literally have every item here. We didn't put any COVID costs in here. But obviously we incurred COVID costs and had to sort that out. We spent more on insurance because we had to stop down and we kind of had to like renew policies for longer than we thought. So you sort through your production costs and then you think about your post. Do you have a finishing house in mind? Do you have an editor and an AE in mind? Something to remember is if you don't have a facility where you're editing, it's important to remember that editors and AEs need fees for their systems at home. Just like a DP has gear, you need to remember editorial stations. Lots of money for drives, because you'll want to have like fast drives in the field, but bigger, more robust drives to save your film. You need backups, just like stuff like that, like little things. And it's why it can be a conversation. And before Rebecca and I even submitted a budget, we had multiple revisions, right? And some things that I might think that are needed in the field ended up not being needed. And so we could use that money, to apply to like more archival, which is also like important. It's important also as you're hiring your key positions, like an archive producer, maybe to talk through the story, not maybe, absolutely talk through the story and like think about how much archival costs. It will always cost more than you think. If you don't have a post house in mind, it's good to start getting estimates before you submit a final budget so that you're not so far off that you're like scrambling at the end. Obviously, you can raise more money at any point. It's also important to remember that your budget doesn't have to limit you in any way. It's like the creative framework you can work with. So like, it's my goal to not say no to Rebecca. It's my goal to figure out how can I make her vision come to life with the money we have? So like, what tools can I give her so that she can go and get the interview she wants? So that's like the most important thing to me as the line producer is like, how can I set you all up for success?
That's great. And we're going to share these slides again, but these kind of follow the phases of production. So kind of at the beginning, it's looking at like our core staff. So, that was myself there as the producer for like a year to be on the project full time at a weekly rate. And then this moves through production, kind of being in the field into here we come into post. So, we're getting closer to the finish line at this point and thinking about bringing on our wonderful editor, Chad, who is on here, and making sure Chad is compensated for his fancy computer equipment. And, and I think the drives thing Katie was bringing up, we had a full remote situation because of COVID in part, so I didn't end up meeting Chad until we were at Color. So we had Chad editing in Vermont. We had an assistant editor in Texas. We had a graphics person in Texas. I was kind of between New York and DC. Katie was in California. And I think, that is just how we're all working now from here on out. So I think the need to budget for those drives as you're having to ship stuff kind of around, or if there's other stuff. I think we just had like a general office supplies thing in here, but it also meant, thinking about like cloud storage, like paying for like a Frame.io account because we're passing cuts to review back and forth, or a Dropbox account. So kind of thinking about all those details, and then kind of, the less fun stuff like insurance and legal fees and accounting, which, ended up being pretty significant. And it was really helpful to know that at the beginning from someone like Katie, who had to buy insurance for productions before, so that we could get that quote, so that as I was going out to do my fundraising, I wasn't getting a certain amount of money and then realizing, oh, that had to all go to insurance later. I don't have any money to rent a camera now. So really thinking about everything kind of from the start. And here I've also attached, this is IDA. They have like a sample budget, and this links out to their site, and you can download a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. So for those of you starting to kind of fill in your budgets, this can be a great starting place. we just had two big funders. This one I think is helpful because it's looking at like bringing in like a lot of different ways of funding. So this one, you can see they have grant 1, 2, 3, and 4 for different amounts. And that was kind of, maybe that's just getting them going. You get $25,000 to start you out, and maybe that helps you make your sizzle, and maybe pay like a smaller contract rate to bring on like a line producer who can make that first budget for you. And then you're going from there, kind of scaling up as you're then getting ready to get enough money to like really get out in the field and start filming. And then this one has some investment from a broadcaster. We tried to go that route of getting like a production company to come on for the idea, and give money. That did not end up being our route. We also tried we had some private investor lunches that did not pan out. We ended up going the grant route, but this one is kind of a nice example because there's a lot of different ways to kind of get money. But I think the big takeaway I hope you all get is that your budget is really going to be what shows your funders you're serious and you know how to make the thing happen. This was not a surprise, but this is just an important reminder, which is pay yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing when it's your first documentary, where it can feel a little intimidating to ask for the money you need to make the project you want to make happen before you kind of fully have that track record behind you of having done that. The fact that I budgeted into our film a year of production salary for myself and 1 year of post-production salary for myself, that is the only reason our project happened. For 3 years, I was working on this film on my nights and weekends, while I was doing other work, and that it wasn't sustainable for the amount of attention it needed. And I think paying yourself, including that line item for yourself in a serious, salary, like the money you need to live and do your work, that also shows your funders that you respect your own ability to make the project happen. If they don't see a line item in for you, they're going to have a harder time believing that this project's going to get finished if they think you're just moonlighting for it. So putting that line item in for yourself shows your funders, I'm serious about making this project, and I'm serious about making a commitment of my time to have that project made. Katie touched on some of these, but feel free to chime in more, Katie. But asking for good money for your crew, is important, as Katie mentioned, because we want to hit those industry standards, and you don't want to be, beg, borrowing, and stealing if you're trying to do a project that is ambitious. You really want to be able to hire people at the rate they deserve, and you don't want to spend years kind of calling in favors from people, maybe at the beginning as you're trying to get a sizzle together. But once you get to the place that you think your idea is worthy and matters, and you're going out to funders for it, similar to paying yourself, you're showing your funders, I want to hire serious crew for this project who are professionals, and they need food when they're on set and nice coffee so that everyone's happy. And, I don't want everyone, tripled up on my friend's couch when we fly into LA to shoot. We want to be having hotels for everyone and ability to travel people to the places they need to go.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add one thing about eating is it's important to remember, even if you're non-union, your crew really needs to eat every 6 hours, and not just let's grab a granola bar and take a 15-minute break. Everyone needs to sit down for 30 minutes at least. I like a 45 to an hour because especially if you're going to a restaurant, people need time to order and just have a second to themselves. I also think it's important when you're talking to your crew and hiring everyone, especially if you're dealing with a heavy topic, to give them a personal call. I call every single person I hire and talk them through the creative and what to expect on the shoot day. And if it is a heavy subject, I just give them advance notice, hey, we're talking about some things. It might, let me know if you're going to have a problem with it, or if you'd like to bow out, or you need a minute, totally acceptable. But it's important to remember that they're your teammates and they're helping you make your project.
You're also just going to get better stuff if you're taking care of your crew physically with good food, and emotionally with proper breaks. But it also comes back to then, how many days do you need? Because when you do make sure you're scheduling in those proper breaks every 6 hours, maybe something that you thought was a 2-day shoot is actually a 3-day shoot. so you want to be thinking about all those things. And then these are, again, just kind of some not fun things necessarily for a creative person, but really important if you're going to get the money you need to make what you want, which is insurance, things like payroll, things like lawyers. So we had to get production insurance so that, if there was anything that happened to any of our crew, God forbid, while we were working, that we were covered and could compensate people, or if anything happened in any of the buildings we were filming in. And a lot of the buildings will ask that you have a certificate of insurance. And also when we needed to rent gear, they often needed to see that our production company had insurance. So insurance was a big cost and something you'll want to get a quote on as you're making a budget. At the very end of the project, we also needed coverage in terms of like if there was any defamation issues in the film as it goes out. You want to make sure you're covered as your film goes out into the world through insurance that way too. And then making sure we had to run like a title report. Our title was join or die. So like a somewhat kind of known phrase. And so we had to like pay lawyers to run a title report on that to make sure there was no copyright infringement before that was kind of hitting the festival circuit. And then fiscal sponsorship. So we got grant funding. So that needed to come into a nonprofit shell. And since I didn't have a nonprofit, and this is often what directors do when they're funding through grants, is you get a fiscal sponsor. So a group that is a nonprofit that can hold your grant for you and then allocate funds out from there. So my paycheck was coming every week from our fiscal sponsor who was holding our grant. That grant money was never coming kind of straight into me. And then when we needed to pay Katie or pay Chad or other people on our team, it was coming through our fiscal sponsor, but they take a 5 to 7% cut of your total budget for the task of holding that money for you in their bank account and helping you with accounting. So again, a line item you want to think about if you're raising $100,000 for your film and you're going to do grants and it's going to a fiscal sponsor, you want to make sure you know what percentage they're going to take, because you're just going to immediately off the bat have to set aside, $5,000 if you're raising $100,000. Running payroll versus a 1099 could also be something you want to think about. And if you need a payroll company to run payroll, we did 1099s for everyone because it was coming from our fiscal sponsor.
You go the 1099 route, it's important to remember that you need workers' comp. Normally workers' comp insurance comes through the payroll company, but you need to add it to your production insurance if you go the 1099 route. And then you just need to make sure like your accounting, whether your line producer is doing accounting or you have a production accountant. I mean, we had a sponsor, so they helped me with accounting, but you need to make sure everyone's like how much you paid everyone is accurate at the end of the year, so you can get everyone's 1099s out for their taxes and make sure that's done on time. That's something important to remember.
Yep. So if you don't have that fiscal sponsorship, making sure you have a good line item for an accountant who can help with that stuff and send out that paperwork to people. And then lawyer costs was another thing. So early in the phase, we needed a little bit of money for lawyers as I was like getting someone to give us location releases and appearance releases. And then we were working with a more famous known person doing a story about his life. So working up like an MOU, which is a memo of understanding, I think that stands for. If I have that wrong, correct me in the chat. But just paperwork if there's kind of like any life rights issues that you have to bring in a lawyer for, and then later lawyers are coming into the process as you're doing fair use clearances. One way to save on archival is try to have a fair use argument when you're throwing to like an ABC or NBC News clip of someone. But you need lawyers to tell you if you have a strong enough case for that to be fair use, or if you're putting yourself in a vulnerability to get sued when you put that out later for not buying that archival.
Yeah, and you need a fair use review and opinion letter to get E&O insurance, and you also need your fair use lawyer to help with E&O insurance. So it goes hand in hand. And I do want to add that you need your E&O insurance paid for and in place and bound before the film or series airs. Like that's like a non-negotiable. You just need to cover yourself. That one's important.
And E&O, for people who don't know, because it was new to me when I went through this process, is errors and omissions insurance. So that's just the insurance you get in case you get sued by by someone when your film goes out, out into the world. So on a streaming platform, or we are just in the festival tour right now, and we got it to be safe for festivals too. So, we had lawyers at an entertainment firm reviewing our cut and making sure, we weren't at risk for a lawsuit. And that involved kind of how we were using fair use in that. So, and getting that insurance in conjunction with legal review of your cut toward the end of the project is something you might not know going into it, but these are things you don't want to be surprised at down the road. Archival can end up being very expensive. I just did kind of a random search in Getty, and just this photo alone costs $680 for the single photo. So, like Katie mentioned, kind of those interviews that she's doing with directors at the beginning, is this going to be archival heavy? For us, we wanted to get old footage specifically of this one person, Robert Putnam, from some of the TV networks. So we knew we needed like a decently sized archival budget for that. But then other things, I was able to talk to Katie, like there was going to be a lot of Library of Congress stuff, which was free to use and not under copyright. But just, if you're going to do a documentary that might have some archival, it's good while you're making your budget to start doing some searches in a place like Getty or AP and get a sense for, okay, how much do these photos that I maybe want to include in my film potentially cost?
Yeah. And anything with archival, if you have a reporter on camera speaking or just on camera, it instantly makes it more expensive. And sometimes you have to get the reporter's sign off to use it, or the network. So that's important to think about too. Obviously, an archival producer could help you navigate those situations, but definitely something to think about when you're crafting your story is like, what do you really, really need? Like, when you come down to it.
Yeah. And I'll just take the opportunity to say too, like we decided we wanted to bring an archival producer onto our project. We didn't need them for like the full 49 weeks that I was on, but we knew we needed someone with like knowledge of how to navigate. And so we brought on Rebecca Kent, who's a great New York based archival producer, and that person can help you because they might have the knowledge like, oh, you want a picture of X era. It's really expensive here. It's going to be less expensive here. And that's where it was good to like recognize that, while I could do my own searches for archival, bringing on that role, saved us time and money ultimately, and we didn't need that person on for the whole time, but maybe we wanted to make sure we had like 6 weeks worth of archival producer. So I could do a little bit myself on Library of Congress, but as I was getting into tougher things, bringing on someone with that expertise was really helpful. Other things to think about, this was one, there's like a women's production collective out in LA, I think, that brought this up recently at another budget thing that I happened upon, which was something I hadn't thought about, but do you have childcare costs or family costs that, need to be accounted for in order for you to be able to do your job? And finding ways that you can get those in your budget, even if it's hidden in like your producer salary, but, thinking about things like that. And for me, I also have here like consultants. I knew this was my first time doing a feature, and I knew I wanted a little bit of money to get advice from other people. And, to be able to pay some of those people for their advice and expertise, who could help me navigate. Like once we had several different consultants at various different points in the project. Like once we got into South by Southwest as our world premiere festival. And once we got in there, I wanted to bring someone on just for like the 5 weeks leading up to that festival that I could meet with once a week that could help me navigate the festival itself, so that I knew we were kind of getting the most out of promoting our film at it, and that was someone who'd had several film. They were like a festival specific consultant. And prior to that, we had another great consultant who, worked in the PBS network for many years that was able to consult us kind of on story and give us really good feedback on that. So thinking about where your blind spots are, that you might want to have a little bit of extra money to pay people for their guidance. And then, there were some final stretch things that I think are good to think about, which was like festival costs can get really expensive. So they can be almost like $100 sometimes per festival. So if you're applying to 100 festivals at $100 a pop, that can add up, and you don't want to get to the last mile of the marathon and not be able to cross the finish line by getting your project kind of out in front of as many people as possible. There's also something called like a DCP, which is the type of file that a lot of film festivals need to project your film instead of just an MOV. And I think our DCP costs like $1,000 maybe, Katie, to make. So they're, just things that I had no idea when I was going into this process, where it really helps to talk to someone else who's made one of these budgets before. You have to pay for closed captionings because you really want to make sure your film is widely accessible. And increasingly, like, audio descriptions are becoming popular too. And so those are things that, you want to be going out to services to get help with. And then are there marketing and PR things? Like, once we got into a festival, we then wanted a poster. And this was something I think we hadn't fully budgeted for, but we had a little money left over. But it's the type of thing, for you all that might be thinking about making a budget, get in some of those marketing and PR costs into that early budget for making a poster for your film, for making a trailer for your film as we're still sending our trailer around, as we're kind of going into distribution talks now. And, and for that, we had our main editor on our project, and, we couldn't pull our main editor away to help us make a trailer. And sometimes you want someone too that's specifically just focused on like trailers or sizzles. So, getting quotes from people that do that work, working that into your budget. And then at South by, we're also working with a PR person who was kind of helping us to get press. And they also had, a rate. So kind of thinking about, when you get to the place of, are you going out to festivals, and do you want some help to make sure, that your film kind of has legs out in the world? And then just last part, I know we've just sent you kind of like a ton of information really fast, but I think the best thing to do as you're kind of thinking about launching a project is really break it down into these stages. Maybe you're not getting like a full dump of money to make your project right out the gate. That's very rare. Usually you're getting a little bit kind of at a time as you're building up, and then maybe more in the later stages. But kind of for breaking it down to these stages helps. So think about pre-production, where you need like maybe a little bit of money for you, a line producer to kind of help them make a budget. Maybe you need a small crew and an editor to shoot a couple days and get a sizzle made so that you can have a proof of concept as you're fundraising. And maybe you need a lawyer just for like a few days to get some kind of release forms worked up for you. And then, production, which is going to be production and post, are really going to be your kind of bulk of where your money is getting spent, where you're traveling, you're paying yourself to produce, or hiring producers, you're paying for gear. And then post, as you're paying for editors. We had a great animator that was on our project, that we were lucky that we budgeted that money, I think, early, because we knew we wanted to, our project shows a lot of social science data, and we know we wanted to animate graphs. So another question I think that you all should be asking yourself, do I need animation in this project? That then becomes another line. Music, are you hiring a composer, trying to buy music? Do you want to license something from the Rolling Stones for your film, trying to get that quote, and then those kind of archival costs and posts. And then, this last fourth one that I didn't kind of write out all the details, but thinking about promotion at festivals. So getting your film in, applying to film festivals, getting a trailer made, getting a website put up, making a poster, and if you need any marketing and kind of PR help.
When you were speaking about the fiscal sponsors and how they charge that, I think you said 5 to 7% fee.
Yeah.
If your budget is ever changing, obviously when you first link up with them, you have a number, but if your budget changes past that, say your budget doubles from there, are they going to double their fee after that? Or how does that kind of push and pull work?
The fee stays the same, so they should not be changing that, but the amount that it would change, that they're taking out of your budget based on if you got more money. So you're just going to need to account for that every time you're getting more money. So like, let's say you get $100,000 first, their fee is 5%, know that you got to set aside $5,000. And then if in your next phase, you raise 200,000, just make sure in that next budget you send for that next round of fundraising that you're adjusting their fiscal sponsorship fee, and now you're going to owe them $10,000 instead of instead of 5. I think one thing though, another way to maybe think about it instead of that is if you're raising money in phases, you still want your budget at the beginning to be the full amount of starting line and finishing line. As you're asking for more money from more people, usually the funders will say, how much of your total have you raised to date? So if you're again, just doing 100,000 and you get a $20,000 grant, you already in that 100,000 have the $5,000 set aside for the 5% fee. You get 100,000, you get 10,000 or 20,000 from that first funder. As you go out to the second funder, they'll say, how much have you raised to date? And you'll say, our budget is 100,000. That is staying static. We have raised $20,000 to date. We still need 80,000 to completion. And so those lines are staying static. And I think that's this whole idea of it's your roadmap to how you're finishing. You're thinking, what is my dream project in mind and how much does it cost? And you're fundraising with that in mind. So you're not then changing the project itself as you suddenly get a random windfall of money. You have it set. This is my project. It's going to look like this because I'm asking for this amount of money. And you're kind of like fundraising to that.
Questions around budgeting. Knowing that a funder, like a typical film funder, they're going to give a portion of the finishing funds, let's say 50K or 100K, but the finishing funds, including my salary, is 200, let's say, So how do I argue or rather say, even though it's 200K to finish, your 50K or your 100K is going to be really, really impactful. And if that's the case, I'm also saying, should I put in my budget, my salary is X amount, and say this is the fair, so that letting them know that I'm deferring it.
Yeah, I'm actually working on finishing another independent feature, and we're kind of in the same, we're very close to finishing. So it's also in managing expectations is, and I'm not doing the fundraising, the director is, but so we just kind of do what we can with the money we have because we can't overextend ourselves. So we with our vendors or people that we've hired, we talk about what we can pay and when we can pay. And we don't finish certain things until we have the money to do it, unfortunately. So we aired the film somewhere and we still needed money to pay for our archival. So we had watermarked archive in the film because we couldn't afford to pay for it yet. And luckily, through that screening, we raised more money. So then we could pay for things. I wouldn't defer your salary for too long, but I think that's something you have to keep in mind is what can I pay for as I go, right? Because you don't want to come out of pocket for major costs.
The question was about how to show this situation to the funder so that the funder
I would just come up with your budget, what you need to finish and what each thing costs. And then you tell them the payment schedule. If you're not paying yourself because you need to pay for the mix, then I think that's important to know, your contribution is super important to me and will help us get this part done. And so I'm deferring my fee in order to get that portion done. But I think it's important to break it down and show them your payment schedule.
Yeah. And different funders have different, we had to report to our funders down to the detail of receipts from coffee. So, we really made sure we were staying inside those lines. And when we started buying COVID masks with our hair and makeup money, I wrote to our funders and said, you're going to see all these other things coming in. I've moved money from here to here and all that. You have to be ready to be transparent and do all that reporting. And that's where having a line producer or an accountant became really important because if you're taking on a serious amount of money, you need to be shepherding that fiscal responsibility well.
We also have some questions in the chat too for people who are more comfortable typing. I know one was, what's a good amount to pay yourself? So I'm just going to do a plug for the VC's Pay Transparency. This is something VC has. It's a website. I can also share it. We can also make sure it's shared when we share this presentation, but basically it's where people are reporting what they're getting paid. And so that's a great way to decide what you charge. I don't know if Katie or Rebecca, you have an answer to that one, but
I would pay yourself whatever you need to cover your costs to solely work on this project. And I know that maybe seems like too much for your film, but it's not. Whatever you need, childcare, mental health costs, groceries, rent, all that good stuff on a weekly or monthly basis, that's how much you pay yourself. Like, what is your true rate if you were going to go work somewhere else? That's what you ask for. I saw another question, which was, what's the average cost for lawyers? It kind of depends. Fair use lawyers usually start with a retainer, and you agree to like 2 cuts. They'll review 2 cuts usually, and then you see how much of the retainer. The retainer, depending on the company, can be a starting point of $5,000 to $10,000. And then usually whatever you don't use, they'll just like give back to you. Production legal, I would say like minimum like 5,000 to come up with your like deal memos, agreements, location releases, all that good stuff. But also it's important to like whoever you want to hire to get a quote and talk to them first before you add it to the budget.
Yeah, and just one note of context I'll add, like we geared this this workshop towards like making a first feature that you're trying to get on like a streamer or a PBS. You know, I want to point out, obviously you can make a documentary without paying a $5,000 lawyer fee and still have it go on a great community tour and have a huge impact. But just for context, I guess some of these things were a shock to me when I first met with Katie. And so for anyone that some of these numbers are a shock to them too, that was part of the reason I wanted to do this workshop, to just disseminate more of that information about how much stuff costs, if you want to make something that's going to be at a level that you could later be approaching a Hulu or a Netflix or a PBS and have wide distribution, to get some of that info out for people that are trying to do this independently and not through a big production company. But I also don't want that to scare anyone off who wants to make a documentary, but, feels like, they don't think they can get $10,000 for lawyer fees. But that's why it's important to do that budgeting work at the beginning and think, where do you want this to end? Where's the finish line? If the finish line is Hulu, you're going to need insurance. And you're going to need lawyers helping you out. So it's good to kind of be thinking about that stuff early.
I actually have questions for both of you. So for Katie, my question is, when a filmmaker comes to you and hires you as a line producer and says, hey, I'm working on a verite documentary and I don't know the end of the story, go on for a few years, how do you budget for that? And then my question for Rebecca is, how do you budget for a sizzle reel and budget for someone like Katie at the very start of the project before you just have an idea and maybe some willing participants, but nothing else?
That's a toughie, because it could go on for a long time, right? But you still kind of want a framework.
Like Hoop Dreams went on for 12 years. That's the one that always comes to mind.
Yeah, no, that one, Rebecca, you might have to go while I think about this. It's so tough for me as a line producer because I need to work within a framework to help you. Rebecca, you might have to go first.
Yeah, I think the thing that helped, and when I went into this coming from that framework of I'm going to follow and see how this unfolds, but I also knew I wanted to put a more ambitious project out into the world. And so I think that meeting with Katie helped me to be like, okay, what do I actually need to make this story happen? And it gave me some limiting factors that were actually helpful. Like once I only had 15 verite days, then that helped me think about, okay, how can I get what I need in that amount of time? And it honestly helped me finish the project then. So I think just finding where are those ways you can have some limiting factors, even within a story that has some unfolding to happen, like knowing, okay, I'm following a woman who's on a journey towards like the end of high school or something. At least maybe okay, this is going to be 3 years. let me at least make sure I'm shooting 10 days per year. And I've got 3 more years where I'm following this person in high school. And we're going to shoot 10 days one year, 10 days the next year, and 10 days the third year. And I know how much a camera person costs for 30 days because I've interviewed my camera person, or I'm filming it myself, and, and I know my day rate for that. And then being, like Katie said throughout this, being ready to make those shifts within as stuff comes up. So then maybe you only ended up shooting 7 days in the first year. Suddenly you get 3 bonus days, and now you can add those to year 3. When there's actually a little more action in the person's life that you didn't see coming. But I think, and again, as I was planning this workshop, I was thinking really of it like a roadmap, like how do your budget ends up becoming a roadmap for how does the project get completed? So finding any limiting factors you can, even as you're following someone in a doc thing that's going to unfold, will help your project actually eventually get out in the world, which is what we all want kind of with the work that we're doing.
I feel like that answers the second part. Like you still have to plan that you're going to, film and need crew to help you and an AP or another producer and an editor. So you still have to think about chunks of time and expectations, like it sounds like you would mostly be part-time or sometimes not even working on the project necessarily, like maybe one day here or there. So then it kind of just is the same thing where you're like, okay, this project will probably take a few years. What can I do each year? Can I give myself an allotted amount each year? And then maybe that helps you, like maybe you get 50K a year or something to do some shoots. And then as you get closer, you allow yourself to have more money because you're going to finish. And it's once again, talking to your teammates and your crew about expectations, like, and working around their schedules, since you can't keep them on full time.
And for that first question, in those first 3 years I was working on this project, I was doing it nights and weekends. So I was doing the beg, borrow, and steal, borrowing a camera, from my boyfriend at the time to go, because I didn't own one, to go shoot the person that we were following. And then I was, I know how to edit. So finding what are your skills, I know how to edit a little bit, not as well as our editor, Chad, but, enough that I could make a sizzle that maybe got us like $5,000 from a smaller grant. And then within that, I was able to bring on, Katie for, I think 2 days or something to make our first budget for us. So, a line producer, this was so many years ago now, but maybe a rate to do that is like between $500 and $700. I don't know, Katie, you would know, to bring on a line producer to make a first budget.
Depends on the person and like what they're working on. I'm more flexible because I have a full-time job, and I'm more passionate about like just helping filmmakers get their projects done. So I think it's like a case by case. Like I'd rather see that you get the budget done and you get your funding than I get my full rate, which like for an indie doc is not really feasible. So like, it's just talking to someone and seeing what they're able to do. And at certain points with Rebecca, I couldn't help her on shoots. So I would change my rate because I couldn't plan any shoots for her. I could only do financial stuff.
Yeah. And I think finding people that match where you're at every phase of fundraising. So when we got our first sizzle, I was like hiring people that were early. Like Katie said, it was like her first larger project maybe that you took on independently, right, Katie?
Yeah, just got like a big company backing. I was like, oh, we're gonna be scrappy and figure this out.
Yes, yeah. And then like I think I brought on someone to help with that first sizzle who was like early in their career, and I think he made a sizzle for me for like $1,500. But then we went back to him when we wanted to make a trailer, and at that point he was 5 years into his career of cutting things, and then I was able to pay him 6 times that rate because our crew was getting like more advanced as we kind of went up with them. But in those early phases, maybe you're asking people that are earlier on in their career that are taking a lower rate to be your first camera person. Or I was taking a sacrifice by being the camera person myself. I wasn't nearly as good as the DP we later hired. So our early footage where I was just getting stuff for our sizzle is not nearly as good as later, because it starts matching once you get the money you actually want.
When you show a budget to the funders or you submit a budget to the grants, you put a number on those contributions. Like, for example, I shoot in a town where there are no hotels. It doesn't exist. So, we put a rate to the days of lodging even though we stayed at someone's house. I was confused with the fiscal sponsor. Like, for example, if I get a grant for 20,000, the fiscal sponsor gets that percentage out of that grant or out of your total budget?
No, out of the grant. So any money they take in, they're going to take that percentage. Because and I think it just depends on the specifics of the funders you're working with. But for us, none of our foundations are wiring money into my bank account. It's all it has to go into a nonprofit. So we needed that fiscal sponsor. And it's a good idea to think about, if you want to go out for grant money, get that fiscal sponsor in place now, unless you have a nonprofit that can take the money in, which I don't necessarily recommend because I think it's a lot of work to keep the books straight. Get them now so that when you do get a grant from a foundation, they're going to be like, where do I send this check? And it can't come straight to your bank account. So you want to already have that partnership established. So I think we, sat with like $300 in our fiscal sponsor's bank account for 3 years while we were waiting to get a larger amount of money. But we made that relationship early, so we were ready for it.
I think you've actually already answered this, but I just want to be super clear. You met Katie for a consultation. I guess there's no payment. Perhaps it's just, Katie giving her professional advice. You get a sense of how much Katie's going to cost, but you need to go out and do stuff yourself before you can get the budget to pay for Katie. Is that how it often works? And it might even take a year or so. You can't come on board and do a budget until you've got a budget to pay Katie.
Right. At the point I met with Katie, I knew I had, I think, about $500 or $700 to pay Katie. If you don't have that money yet, call someone like Katie and ask how much would it cost you to make the budget. You can also make your own in an Excel spreadsheet, which is why I shared that IDA link. But I needed Katie's help to tell me how much my film was going to cost, because since it was my first, I didn't know what I didn't know. So things like E&O insurance or, and so it really helped being with a line producer who had done this for a lot of other productions. At the point I met up with Katie, she'd worked for MTV and a bunch of other Axios, I think. And so getting that knowledge from someone who's budgeted films was really helpful. And then they know the going rate for the crew, so that crew can be paid fairly. So if you haven't interviewed every single crew you want to work with, they could, she could give an estimate like, DP's charge between X and X. Let's budget on the high end just in case you get someone that's asking for the high end of this industry standard.
Sure. And then just very, very briefly, and sorry, Katie, I mean, you may have said this, but do you often stay on beyond providing the services of giving a budget? You can consult in other capacities as well.
Yeah, it's kind of whatever the director and the producer need. Like in Rebecca's case, after we met and we did the initial budget, then we didn't start working together again for like months until she got all the funding in. And in that time I was just working somewhere else. And then once she got the funding, we started talking about things and the plan and kind of honing in on it more. And then it was just kind of, what did she need? Like, we stopped during the pandemic and then kept in touch when we felt like we were comfortable sending crews out and when Rebecca was comfortable going out into the field. And then from there, we just kind of kept in contact. Like we didn't film a lot consistently. So it was kind of like I would ramp up and down for shoots, or if we had a report to our fiscal sponsor due. And then like once a month on my own schedule, I would also oversee like basic accounting because I'm not a production accountant, but I would work with we use DER. So I would work with DER's accountant to make sure both of our books matched. I kind of worked part-time for most of the time. And then sometimes I would work a little bit more if we were like filming a bunch or we were getting to the finish line in the finishing process and starting to submit for festivals, we would meet more frequently.
Got it. But obviously your time had to be accounted for in that budget that goes to funders.
Yeah, and I kind of, in our budget for our plan, we just put me as like a weekly rate. And then that also gives you money to play with if we want to move money from my line to something else. Like if you want to hire an AP, and I'm not saying that line producers would do this all the time. It's definitely just a conversation on expectations. It was also a conversation on how much I could help without fully leaving the project, because if I'm also working on other things, like I can't be on set or plan shoots.
I think that was a good question to end on potentially. Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming. But yeah, thanks again. And please be on the lookout for more VC events.